Welcome back. In this video, I want to talk about self-assessment. Self-assessment is one of the most important things that you can do as you prepare for the LSAT. And it's often going to make the difference between a mediocre score and an excellent score. In the 15 years that I've been teaching, I've noticed consistently there's one thing that always makes the difference among my students. Disciplined, self-regulated learning. Give me a student with all the talent in the world and give me a student capable of deliberate self-regulated learning, hands down that second student's going to win over the student with talent any day. The same is true for LSAT prep. The students that I've tutored who've done exceedingly well, who've scored in the 99th percentile, those students are disciplined, self-regulated students. They may have talent, they may not. I don't really know, because I think anyone who can make it through a 4-year program of study can master the LSAT. But with that discipline, self-regulation, that careful attention to how they studied and self-assessment, that's what puts those students over the top. So that's what I want to talk about today. Now, most people find self-assessment incredibly difficult, and they find it difficult for a couple of main reasons. First, you are far too nice to yourself. And that's natural and understandable, right? If you've ever cut somebody off in traffic, you might have said to yourself, oh, well, that's all right. I feel bad that I did that. I probably shouldn't have done that, but I was in a hurry, or I had to get here, or I wasn't paying attention. But if someone else cuts you off in traffic, we're often very negative about their perceived motivations or their perceived intentions. We're very unforgiving. And that applies in a lot of areas, right? That when we do something that may not be the best thing in the world, we're very forgiving to ourselves. We let ourselves off the hook quite a bit. Whereas with other people who do those same things, we tend to be much more judgmental. And that's natural. But when it comes to self-assessment, our natural tendency to be nice to ourselves, to let ourselves off the hook, means that we slow down, right? We don't push as hard as we otherwise might. We let ourselves off the hook when we make mistakes, and that means that we hamper our own improvement. Don't get me wrong, it's a wonderful quality to be forgiving. But it makes it extremely difficult to be good at self-assessment. When you're engaged in self-assessment, you've got to be really tough with yourself. And that's hard to do. So self-assessment is hard to do. The second reason that we find it difficult to self-assess is that we find it hard to set performance goals. If you really want to improve as efficiently as possible, you have to be capable of setting clear and specific performance goals. But we find that difficult to do, and part of the reason is that we don't want to fail. And a lot of times in self-assessment, we're going to set goals that we do not meet, and that's not going to feel very good. And we have a hard time wanting to do things that don't feel very good, especially when the payoff is delayed with the LSAT. And connected to that, that's the whole point, right? We tend to work on things that make us feel good. And that means that we tend to gravitate in our studying and our LSAT prep towards the things we're already comfortable with, and not so much with the things that we're not comfortable with. And if that's not you, if you can really dial in and focus on the things that are difficult for you, that make you uncomfortable, that you have a hard time with, great. Keep doing that. That's the best thing you can do. But for most of us, for the rest of us, it's very hard to want to set performance goals, especially where there's a chance we might not meet them or when we're dealing with something difficult. But here's the thing. If you want to study well, if you want to study efficiently, and you want to improve as fast as you can, you've got to continue to do things that make you uncomfortable in your prep. I say this to my students in philosophy all the time. If you're struggling to put together what I'm talking about, if you're struggling with the concepts, you're finding it uncomfortable to think in a more analytic way, or that certain critical reasoning concepts are difficult, I always tell my students, you're doing it right. Because if you never felt uncomfortable in your learning, if you never felt unsure of yourself in your learning, then it means you're only staying within the bubble of things you know. And that is no way to improve. That's no way to get better. You want in your education, you want to be in a place of discomfort or uncertainty or a lack of complete familiarity with the concepts you're talking about or the way of thinking that you're working on. That's the key to improvement. So in your LSAT prep, you want to constantly be pushing yourself into territory you're not comfortable with. You want to constantly be developing the skills that you find it tough to do. If any of you are familiar with Plato's allegory of the cave, where the prisoner chained down facing the wall eventually breaks free and makes his way out of the cave, you might remember that when Socrates is describing that experience, he describes it as an experience that involves quite a bit of kicking and screaming, frustration, and on the whole, a lack of desire on the part of that prisoner to want to leave the cave. And when he's describing this to Glaucon, he says, right, for the prisoner who's broken free, which do you think looks clearer to that prisoner? The shadows on the wall with which he's already familiar and comfortable, or these new sights that he's encountering when he turns around? And of course, the answer is clear. What he finds more uncomfortable are these new things that he sees when he turns around, even though they're more real, they're more true than what he had previously seen when he stared at the wall. So anytime we advance our learning, anytime we advance our education, it's going to be difficult. We're going to find it uncomfortable. It's going to take an adjustment period, and the LSAT is no different than that. So you set performance goals to try to help push you into those areas that make you uncomfortable so that you can improve and improve and improve. Don't just dwell with the things you're already good at. The moment you start to feel comfortable, that's the time to move on. All right, so I'm going to teach you how to self-assess. I've told you that self-assessment is an important skill, self-regulated learning, an essential skill. So how do we do that? It all starts with your notebook. You should say of your notebook what a rifleman says of his rifle. This is my notebook. There are many like it, but this one is mine. My notebook is my best friend. My notebook is my life, and I must master my notebook as I must master the LSAT. Without me, my notebook is useless. Without my notebook, I am useless. And what are you going to put in that notebook? This. Go big or go home. Now, I've created this anagram because it's easy to remember, but that's all. The B here stands for your baseline. You always want to establish a baseline before you start setting performance goals because you want to understand where it is that you already perform. This is your natural skill level, all things considered. What I mean by that is your baseline is where you will at least perform. No matter how bad things go, no matter how many setbacks you'll always do at least this well. It's a good baseline. Now, your baseline matters because that's the key to evaluating your performance and improving. Now, on the one hand, you can go the easier route. You can hire a tutor to do that for you, to assess your baseline, set your performance goals. I often find myself doing that for my students, and it's the first thing that we do. But you can also do it at home. Whatever it is that you want to improve, let's just say the LSAT as a whole, take that pretest and go over it with yourself, right? Look at the ones you got right. Make a note of the ones you got right, the ones you got wrong. Even though you're new to the LSAT, you can still set that performance baseline just by totaling up the number of different types of things you got right and the number of different types of things you got wrong. And as you learn more about the LSAT and as you study more, you can go back to that baseline and you can understand with greater accuracy what it is that you got wrong and why, and what it is you need to work on to improve. But no matter what, get that baseline. However you get that baseline. And then the goal is improve that baseline. This is one of the things that oftentimes gets overlooked. When we practice and we think and we want to get better, we often think that getting better means improving our best time. We get better by taking our best time and improving that. But I don't want you to think that way. It's easy to get frustrated that way. Maybe down the road you can think that way, but right now, start with that baseline, and all I want you to focus on is improving that baseline. Don't try to beat your best. Just consistently beat your worst every time. New baseline, beat that new baseline. Here's the reason why I think you should work this way. Because on the LSAT, it's very easy to go online and see how you need to perform, right? The number of questions you need to get right for the score you want, the time that you need to have to finish the section with the accuracy that you want. It's very easy to go ahead and get those numbers. It's just math to find out what you need to score, how you need to score that, or what time you need to come in under. Fine. So then the goal here is to take that baseline, take those max numbers, close that gap. And you close that gap not by trying your hardest to hit that maximum number right away. You close that gap by improving your baseline. And the cool thing about that is, as your baseline improves, as you just keep improving over that baseline, setting up that new one, and what you're doing is trying to get your base level of comfort to closely resemble that score that you need. So that when you walk into the test on test day, you know you're going to hit that score. You feel confident that your baseline is as close as you can get it to what you need it to be. You're not worrying about luck. You're not hoping for the best. You're not saying to yourself, I hope I don't get logic game of this type or that type. Your baseline is solid, and it should hopefully match very closely with what you need to achieve, so that when you walk in there, you have a good idea how you're going to do. All right, so the I stands for identify weaknesses. Maybe you don't like that word. You can substitute it with another word, but what you're really doing is identifying performance areas that you want to improve. So that once you have that baseline about whatever skill it is you want to develop, you want to start looking at concrete ways that you can improve that skill based on the weaknesses that you can identify. Or, if you rather, the performance areas where you want to improve to get you to your goal speed, your goal time, whatever it is. And finally, of course, G stands for goals. You have to be setting practical, actionable goals that you can realistically achieve. And those goals need to be as specific as possible, and they need to be as action-oriented as possible. For instance, it's very easy to have a goal that says, I want to improve my logic games, right? Fine, of course that's your goal. That's a great goal to have, but you need to break that down into something specific. For instance, maybe it takes you a while to diagram. Maybe it takes you up to a full minute to diagram, let's say. So you say, okay, I want to get that time down to 45 seconds. That's an actionable goal. You're not worrying about the game as a whole there. You just want to get that diagram time down to from 1 minute to 45 seconds. You want to pick up those 15 seconds. Great, wonderful. Maybe you struggle with, say, could be true questions. So you decide, okay, I missed 8 could be true questions on the last practice session for LSAT games. I want to get that down to 6. What do I think I need to do to get that down to 6? What are some practices? What are some strategies? How can I get that number down to 6? So you want to set really specific, measurable goals. Nothing broad, nothing general, concrete and specific. And then you step back and you say, damn. Data, assessment, metacognition, new goals. Here's the thing, every practice session, you're going to be generating a lot of data, and you don't want any of that data to go to waste. That's why you have your notebook. You're going to record all of that data in your notebook. Not just data about your performance in that session, but data about your goals, data about how you performed in meeting those goals, why it is you think you didn't meet those goals, or what you did right insofar as you did meet those goals. Data, data, data. Once you have that data, you're going to carry out some very specific assessments. Now, I'm not going to talk a lot about what those assessments should look like, because when we get to those skills, I will give you those assessments. I will tell you some ways that you can assess your performance. Finally, the big daddy of them all. This is one of the most important things you can do when we call it metacognition. Metacognition is just generally referred to as thinking about thinking. Now, we've known about metacognition since the 70s, but it was around the year 2000 when the National Academy of Sciences put together this compendium book called How We Learn. And there, they identified metacognition as one of the primary ways that we learn efficiently and well. And guess what? It's particularly effective with a new skill if you're a complete beginner. Here's what you do. You take a step back and you think about what you just did, and you think carefully about it and actively about it. Now, I know it sounds simple, but it's a huge skill. Think of it this way. Let's say you've taken a logic game section, you've looked at the data, you've made an assessment of that data. Now you want to engage in metacognition. So what would that look like? Now, there are no rules here beyond taking that step back and thinking about your performance in terms of a larger context. Maybe you ask yourself, okay, what went well there? Where did I feel really good about this? Or where did I feel like I was just coasting? And maybe you make a note of that. Or if it didn't go so well, you take a moment back and think, what didn't go well? Why do I feel like that didn't go well? What is it that I feel like I failed on? Or from a larger perspective, you could say, okay, if that was a good session, what about my prep to get ready for this practice session do I think contributed to that success? Or what do I need to change about my prep so that I can improve next time? You might also challenge your own expectations. Going into this, when I saw a certain type of game, did I think it would be easy and then it wasn't? Did I make assumptions about these games that I shouldn't have made? What you're doing is creatively reassessing your data and reassessing your own assessment of yourself to see if you can't generate new patterns and new ideas just based on taking a step back and thinking about your larger goals and what you accomplished and what you didn't and why. That's metacognition. One of the reasons why metacognition is so insanely effective is because it helps us reduce and maybe even prevent what's called the Dunning-Kruger effect. This effect just means that people who are undeveloped or incompetent at a certain skill are often very bad at assessing their own incompetence or their lack of understanding of that skill. So they started carrying out a number of experiments, and what they found was that people who are incompetent or underperformers at a certain task are often very bad at knowing that about themselves. And of course, there's also a counter effect on the other side, right? The Dunning-Kruger effect doesn't just apply to people who are bad at a skill. It also applies to people who are very good at a skill. So for instance, I've been working on logic critical reasoning for 15 years. There are some things about those skills that come very easy to me because of all that practice. And the Dunning-Kruger effect on my end is that I'm much more likely to think that developing this skill is easier than it actually is because I'm regarding it from the point of view of the ease with which I'm able to do it. So that generates a lot of pitfalls when we're trying to assess performance. What that means for you is that if you can establish a baseline and work on improving that baseline, you're always going to have at least a reasonable assessment of your current skill level. You're not going to think that you're better at a skill than you really are because you'll be relying on that hard data you generate to set performance goals and measure yourself against that. And then, of course, you set new goals. So just remember those anagrams. Remember that you need to go big or go home, and then you need to step back and say, damn. And this is your superpower. Self-assessment is really going to turbocharge your ability to perform effectively. Now, studies have shown repeatedly these are excellent ways to learn. They show results. But the big X factor is you. There are no silver bullets. There are no shortcuts. There are no perfect strategies. If you want to hit something like 170 or higher, the biggest determinant of that score is not the quality of your tutor or your prep course, it's you. You have to have the persistence, the dedication, the sheer perseverance to continue to set performance goals, fail, improve, and succeed. And it takes a lot of work. And I don't mean a lot of hours of work. It takes a lot of dedicated, self-regulated assessment. Now, if you're comfortable with that, or you develop that skill well, and you've got that persistence and perseverance, quite frankly, I don't see that anything's going to stop you from a 170 or higher. Now, don't get me wrong. The LSAT is about skills. You've got to learn skills. It is also about learning the test. You've got to learn how to take the test. But you also have to self-assess. You also have to be a dedicated, active, self-regulated learner. And I think there's a tendency to rush, both on the part of students and on the part of tutors. There's a tendency to want to demonstrate value. I mean, after all, if you're paying me for a service, I want to show you that you're getting your money's worth. The problem is, getting that money's worth is often a delayed promise. I have to essentially convince you that it'll result in gains down the road. And I think that leads to a tendency to want to produce quick, but in some degree artificial results. I want to show you that your score increases, but maybe I'm also not providing you the skills to do that on your own and to continue to develop. But if I can get you strong on your self-assessment, strong on your self-regulated learning, then the goal, the hope is you don't need a tutor at that point. You don't need someone like me. What you need is to continue improving that baseline until you close the gap on your skills. Also, quite honestly, I find it more fun to study when I'm engaged in setting performance goals. Why? Because I can do something new every day. I don't have to dread opening the workbook. I don't have to say, oh, I've got to study for the LSAT, right? I always have a goal. I always have a performance measure that I want to meet. I always know exactly what I'm doing, and I stop when I've done it. And that feels good. Like, yes, you're going to plateau, you're going to have setbacks, but you're always going to know what you're doing. And so when I work that way, I enjoy sitting down to work. I enjoy what I'm about to do. And maybe you will too. So that's it. That's what I want you to do. Get that notebook, get ready to start self-assessing. And as you work through this course, make that the most essential part of your study. Thanks for listening. Keep watching.